Welcome back to Quickies with Angela and Caity.
I'm Angela Dawn of Authentic Heart Coaching. I'm a tantric sex coach, a meditation instructor, and a big fan of honest, vulnerable communication.
And I'm Caity Wilkinson of Caity Coaches. I help women stop people pleasing and start choosing themselves and their pleasure in sex, love, and relationships.
So, Katie and I are deep into our Summer of Loving Communication mini series, and today we're bringing you a big one: how to have the hard conversations. Those awkward, tender, emotional conversations that we humans love to avoid.
Because when we learn how to have these conversations, our relationships start to feel safer, more real, and yes, even sexier. So, in coaching school, we were taught a powerful structure for these kinds of conversations, and we'd like to walk you through that step by step today.
That's right. And we're going to actually talk about two different structures, right? So, this first one we're going to talk about is the way you would approach an external or a surface need. So, not something super deep. This is more for, can you please put your phone down at dinner? Or I'd love it if you made more effort in planning date nights. So we're not talking about super small things, but we're not talking about, ripping our chest open and bearing our soul either. So for something like this, we break it down into 5 steps. Step one is context and space. So finding the right time and place. If your partner is in the middle of work emails or you're at a loud restaurant, that's not your moment.
You want to
Okay.
minimize distractions.
Absolutely. And, get them when they're in a reasonable mood too, right? So context and space, very important. You Part two is starting that conversation with something positive, right? So you want to set a warm tone, you want to connect with them. So in our cell phone example, I could continue in that, and you might try saying something like, I love how much you've been showing up lately. I want to talk about something small that would help me feel even better. All
Starting
right.
with the positive note helps it not feel like an attack.
Exactly. Right. You're telling them what's going well and what would make it even better. The third piece of this framework is to express your need and why it's a need, right? So you're not just asking for something, you're letting them know what kind of a difference it's going to make for you. And this is really the heart of the whole conversation. So in our cell phone example, you might say something like, it really helps me feel connected when we talk during dinner. When you're on your phone, I feel a little invisible. So there you're talking about the invisibility you feel, and you're also letting them know how connected you feel when you do have those conversations. You also want to be crystal clear and specific about what you're asking them to do, right? So you're going to tell them exactly what you would prefer, such as, could we try putting phones away during dinner? The last part of this framework is being receptive to feedback, because this isn't a demand, it's a dialogue. So your partner might say, yes, I can do that on most nights, but I do get emergency work texts sometimes. And then that's okay. That's a place for you to begin a negotiation, right? This isn't dictating.
I really want to underscore that part. This is a dialogue, not a demand. We see so many couples getting stuck here where they express a need, but if the partner can't meet that exactly as it's asked, then it turns into a shutdown or resentment.
Yes, absolutely. So being open to what your partner wants doesn't mean abandoning your own needs, but it does mean making space for mutual truth, making space for common good, what's going to work for both of you,
Mhm.
right? It's a dialogue. So you're choosing the right context and space, you're starting with something positive, you're expressing what you need and why, you're being crystal clear and specific about that need, and then you are remaining open to feedback.
Right, because it's the two of you trying to solve it together. It's not person A versus person B. It's us against the problem. Your team.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
All right, so now let's go deeper. This next format is for when you're bringing up something really vulnerable. Maybe it's
Mm,
past trauma, shame, fears, or identity level needs. This is your deep
right.
stuff.
Yeah, this is the deep stuff. This is not please do the dishes. This is like, I don't feel chosen by you. Oof, or I need more emotional presence during sex. This is the sacred stuff. This is something that you might have unearthed in therapy or working with your coach, and you come home and you're like, wow, I really need to share this with my partner. So here's how we break down that big conversation.
So we have the same step one here. That's context and space, but with emphasis on safety. This needs emotional
Mm,
safety. So, for example, you might say, there's something important I want to share, and I'm feeling nervous about that. Can we find a time where we won't be distracted?
beautiful. Yeah. And we're going to go deep on the next step because you need to explain who inside you has this need and why, right? So this is where you bring in your story. I mentioned that these kind of conversations might be something that come out of you doing your own deep work, your own therapeutic work. And so this might have to do with your childhood, right? So you might say something like, this part of me, the part of me that feels this way comes from not being seen in childhood, right? When you leave the room in the middle of a hard conversation, that child part of me freaks out. Okay. So we're going a little deeper here than the need and why. You're really relating it to a part of yourself, maybe your inner child, for example. I promised Caity I would tell this story too. So I have not always been good at having these kind of conversations. I'm the first to admit that. But the way that I found success personally in having these conversations is by drawing out pictures and diagrams. So I know
Ooh, I like where this is
I'm an
going.
artsy person and I do tend to process externally, right? Like I like to write out words or talk with somebody perhaps and then reflect on what's been said or reflect on what I've written. And I find that diagrams are super helpful for me to work out what it is I need in terms of a relationship desire. But also, I find diagrams super helpful for when I'm having these conversations with my partners. And it was actually a joke that Dan had at one point with me where he said, hey, it's been a while since you've drawn me one of your little pictures. He got so used to every time I wanted to make a request in the relationship, I would I'd have little stick figures showing what I didn't want and like little arrows that said this is how I felt when happened, right? And enumerating things in bullet points or lists with little pictures instead of um, is speech. And I think for me, it helps me to write it out that way. But then also when I'm going to have the conversation, it really helps my partners understand where I'm coming from and even creates a document that they can refer to. So like Dan would say, can I take a picture of your diagram? So he could go back and study it and see, what might need to happen going forward, so he wouldn't forget. So yeah, I draw little pictures for my partners that help explain the why.
That's such a brilliant approach. And like for anyone who's unfamiliar, your background is in teaching. So it makes sense to me that, of course, this feels like a teacherly approach.
Yes. And, it is a teacherly approach to acknowledge that, some people take in information in an auditory way, and some people take in information visually, and some people need to physically move their bodies to take in information. So it's a way to perhaps make things easier for your partner if they're more visual. Mhm.
Oh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
All right, so we got to move on here, but that was fantastic. So for the next step, just as with before, you're going to state the need clearly. You say what you need plainly and honestly. An example of this could be, I need to feel like you'll stay emotionally present even when things are hard.
Mm,
I need to feel like you're not abandoning me when this happens. Then you're going to give the crystal clear and specific action steps. Something like, can we agree to stay in the room when one of us is upset and or say, I need 10 minutes to process this, but I'm coming back instead of one of us silently walking away.
mm, yeah. In this particular example that you gave, Katie, I love for people to pre-negotiate this. Um, when I work with couples, I will help them develop a structure for what they're going to do if a volatile argument is coming up. And so if you have already agreed to take time to process and then come back, it's so, so helpful. That's just a little side note.
I love that
Um,
too. Like that feels like it has kind of kinky roots to it, even though that absolutely works in
mm,
every vanilla relationship where you're like, we've
yes,
pre-negotiated. Here are all of my trigger spots. Let's not argue in a way that's going to set off all these for both people. That's fucking
right. And having safe words, same. Right? That like, safe words come from kink, but if your partner is talking with you about something that's really difficult and you're freaking out inside so hard that you can't even listen to them, oh my, is it helpful to already have the safe word that you're going to say before you go take your 10-minute break or 30-minute break or your walk around the block.
even
So
if it's
having
just the
some,
like, hey, I need a breather. Can we take a breather? Like breather can be it, you know? It doesn't have to be
right.
like pineapple upside down cake, you know, like how
Yeah.
people come up with
Right.
creative words.
It can just be, I need 10 minutes to process
Yeah, I need a
it.
second.
Right. Um, so after you have given that crystal clear specific action step, again, you're going to be receptive to feedback. This is a conversation. Your partner might say, I need breaks to stay regulated, but I can promise to always tell you I'm coming back.
And this is where relationships get really real and they grow the most because this is where you can heal a lot of those pieces of yourself and of each other that were wounded a long time ago, long before this relationship
Mm,
started. This is how
mhm.
you make your relationship a strong container for continued healing together.
Yes, yes. And, this has come up when we're talking about these deep needs. A lot of times, these deep needs come from issues that happened when we were quite young. So, if throughout your childhood your needs were dismissed, it becomes harder to ask for what you need, right? And this whole situation becomes more difficult. And so, this is going to take practice on, practice asking, practice listening. If you missed our episode on holding space, the last episode, go back and listen to that space holding episode. It goes really well with this one. And just to recall, the steps here are choosing the right context and space with an emphasis on emotional safety, explaining who inside you has this deep need and why, stating your need clearly, being really clear about specific actions that could be taken to resolve it, and then being receptive to feedback. Um, Having these kinds of conversations are just huge acts of intimacy and love.
Absolutely. Because it's much easier to just stay silent and resentful. But if you do that, your relationship will die at some point. And this
Mhm.
communication actively prevents that from happening. It says, I love, value, and want to keep investing in our relationship. So doing this hard, uncomfortable thing is worth it to me.
Yes. I mean, I can't emphasize enough that having these hard conversations that lead to repair, that's what makes a relationship stronger. That's what
Yes.
helps you grow.
It solidifies your foundation. Oh, and it's
Mhm.
just so beautiful. So if you're listening and thinking, I've got a conversation I've been avoiding, you're not alone. But now you have the tools.
Right. So here's a challenge. Pick one this week. Use either the surface needs or the deep needs format and just give it a try. Even if it's messy, even if you cry, you're building trust and courage every time you lean in to do this, and it does get easier over time.
And you can even try saying something like, I heard this on a podcast and I'd love to try it with you. Make this a team effort. You're learning together, you're investing in your relationship together.
Absolutely. So that wraps up part 4 of our summer of loving communication.
We've talked about consent, iMessages, holding space, and now how to bring up the hard stuff without blowing up the relationship.
And this mini series is close to wrapping, but that doesn't mean we're done with the big stuff. We're
In
getting
September,
bigger.
September, we're taking things even deeper with an episode about conscious uncoupling, all about how to break up with love, clarity, and integrity.
Mm. So, whether you're staying together or going your separate ways, these tools make the journey more human, more honest, and more loving. And if you want more loving communication tools, check out our Passion and Desire Guide that's linked in the show notes, as well as our Pussy Whispering Masterclasses. Come to some of my workshops and retreats for couples.
So, do you have any other offers up your sleeve, Angela? Anything brewing right now?
Of course I do. Course I do, Katie, right? We have the new pleasure series that I have coming up. I'm going to have a workshop in August, a workshop in September, and a workshop in October. And by the time this airs, they might have missed the August one, but come on out to the pleasure series for September and October. These are workshops for individuals. So you can come with your partner, buy 2 tickets, or come on your own. This is going to help you deepen your own pleasure with your self pleasure practices, and it's going to give you great tools to bring into your partnered intimacy. I also have my primal love retreat coming up next year in March in El Salvador, and we are going to get into instinctual intimacy and really being out of your head and in your body and maybe fucking like an animal.
Sounds hot. Thank you for tuning in to Quickies with Angela and Caity.
You can find me at Authentic Heart Coaching on Instagram and on the web at AuthenticHeartCoach.com.
And I'm at Caity Coaches on Instagram and CaityCoaches.com on the web.
And just remember, keep speaking your truth even when it shakes.
And keep loving through it all. We'll see you next time.